Well, let's bring in Howard Yu, Professor of Management and Innovation at IMD Business School, joining us from Switzerland. Anything surprising you've heard out of this Alibaba meeting as yet?
Not too much, but every time when you get engaged with the Alibaba agenda, it kind of reminds you and surprises you how far the e-commerce landscape has evolved in China compared to the rest of the world. I mean, it used to be people still continue to compare Alibaba with Amazon. But today, if you're looking at the core activity that Alibaba Group has been providing, it's nothing like Amazon anymore. It's a reflection on how the internet have fractured between China and the US. But more importantly, is the type of innovation that tech giants are innovating in China compared to the US system. And time will tell whenever Alibaba really pivot outside of China. That type of interaction would be really interesting to pay attention to.
What is the next frontier? We were just posing this question, the next frontier for Alibaba then, do you think?
Well, if you're looking at the Western IT giant, whenever they expand abroad, they kind of do it by themselves. So whether it's Facebook, Amazon, etc., that is not quite the approach that Chinese tech giant embrace. If you're looking at Alibaba, 80% of the revenue is still generated from China. And for reason that, geopolitics as well as consumer behavior, the type of pioneering practices that they could roll out in mainland China probably can be embraced entirely in the rest of the world. So what you see is whenever Alibaba does, they do through local partner. Lazada is a great example, that they really provide a lot of back-end services instead of doing that themselves. So if that is a viable strategy going forward, then Alibaba growth would be practically sky's the limit.
Howard, it's Hadley out in Abu Dhabi. I want to follow on to that and talking about how China has pioneered that different form or new form of e-commerce. How do you see this playing out with the backdrop of tonight, the first U.S. presidential debate, the potential for a different administration by November 4th, and the fact that on both sides of the aisle we still see such a negative outlook for U.S.-China relations? How does that impact the tech space and Alibaba specifically, do you think, in terms of that e-commerce share?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about Alibaba, key success factor is this idea of integrating data across different domains. So it's no longer just things that you buy and consumer behavior track online, but it's also your payment system. Increasingly, they have health services and also all kinds of wealth management offering as well. All of these allow Alibaba to integrate across domain and really curate offering and anticipate your desire in terms of purchasing behavior. That type of integration, at least in the United States, felt pretty perceived as big threat. As a result, I wouldn't be too surprised that what we're seeing going forward is Alibaba would try to entice partners outside of the United States. There are still big markets, whether it's from the Middle East all the way to Southeast Asia or South Asia. Those would be the fast-growing region with a very different type of perception, as well as the regulation is still on nascent form. So that would allow tech giants from China to really shape the environment. But granted, Western Europe and US probably so ossified in certain policy and perception that Alibaba may find it almost impossible to penetrate by this point.
Howard, before I let you go, I want to ask you quickly about Alibaba without Jack Ma, talking about that kind of perception. Does this do anything, in your view, to the perception of this as China's most successful company?
Well, definitely from a headline effect, we'll lose some kind of very charismatic spokesperson for sure. But if you're looking at his successor, Daniel, he's been an Alibaba lifer, essentially, and he has brought forward for Alibaba a number of major innovation as well. So organizations, as they grow, they always require these painful transition. And as Alibaba grow forward as a much more established player around the world, it may not be a bad transition because we're moving from a sort of charismatic type of hyper-driven organization to much more professional, organized organization. So any centuries-old company, they went through these transitions. So one should see that as a welcoming sign.
Howard, we're going to have to leave it there. Howard Yu from IMD Business School, thanks so much for joining us.